Hello, welcome to our next episode of No Lids, No Limits. I'm Kin, and I've got my guest here today, Niels de Vries. Niels, maybe you can give us a little bit of intro about yourself and all the great stuff you're doing with AI.
That sounds good, Ken. Well, I started in the utility space, building high stakes models, planning how the infrastructure got managed. And so I saw that opportunity to bring that utility grade data science to the manufacturing sector. Then AI came into the mix, and I was like, this is the right time to get into this. And the technology is moving so fast that we can now start to apply it much more specifically to all of the unique problems in manufacturing. So right now I'm working on digitization of production processes like scheduling, trying to remove barriers to communication. And AI is actually really good at this communication piece.
Niels, I know you do a lot of work with automating these processes. Why should we be bothering with automation when it comes to manufacturing?
So as you grow, I feel the complexity starts to become too much for just the human brain. And from my background, where they were planning millions and millions of projects and assets, that was an industry where it absolutely couldn't be planned. But what I see in the manufacturing sector is it starts out small enough that you can plan it manually. And then as it grows, the horizon of how long we're planning ahead and stuff like that starts to shrink. And we might actually not see what we're missing by not going for that automation. You start to miss impacts, like a rush order causes a future delay that you might not have planned for. And we're very good at prioritizing what has to happen today, but it's hard to see the bigger picture of how it's going to impact all of my customers and all of my orders when I make a change on the fly today. So in the end, you kind of end up with this rigidity or an inefficiency if you don't start relying on some of those automated tools as you grow.
Yeah, my experience completely echoes that. When you're looking at the bigger picture in a manufacturing operation, there's a lot of moving pieces, and even automating individual parts of it is a challenge. Why is it so difficult to automate scheduling in particular, Niels?
So plans and schedules are often seen as a 100 to 0 activity. And it's like, if the plan isn't like 100% good, I can't follow it at all. And that's because it's hard to differentiate which parts are good and which parts aren't. So the success of trying to automate scheduling is have it fit very well into the process where it can, right now, scheduling is often all process. And so it's like, can we take parts of this process, automate it and enhance the process with the existing tools so that we're not expecting a 100% plan, but instead we're having it essentially help us with our job and alert us of these things that we might not be thinking about.
My experience working with a lot of ERP systems is they do scheduling and planning as one of the modules that they sell. And I know a lot of companies use those. There's a bit of a shortcoming when it comes to your standard ERP systems and how they do planning and scheduling. What is your perspective of how it should be done to be better?
I would say that the scheduling, because it sits at the center of the organization, it's so process dependent. And so trying to fit all of the people who are impacted by scheduling, which is all of the workers, the foremen, the ops people, the sales people, trying to fit that into its own box when this process has been developed and perfected over years is really tricky, which is what an ERP system is. It's like a single, workflow that they distribute to hundreds of manufacturers. Now, also, every manufacturer is building their own little widgets. These processes are very unique to them. And this is where ERP system starts to deviate from what they need. And then you get that, not fully well done plan that exactly mirrors what they need. And this is where AI starts to come in, where we can start thinking about what is this custom process and tailoring it specifically to us.
When it comes to working with AIs in some of our past episodes, we talked about how AI really needs some good data, the clean data to work with. What happens when you come into a company and you're trying to overlay this automated scheduling process and you don't really have perfectly good, clean data? What advice would you give to a company like that?
When I go in, they never have the right data, or sometimes they have clean data, but never the right data. Here's why. You only collect the data when you need it for something. If you're going to start implementing an automated scheduling process, you're going to need different data sets. I'm thinking about worker skills. What skills are related to what jobs? How do we break that down? Because nobody has thought about automating this process, it's all contained up here in people's heads. And so that data doesn't exist, and it probably doesn't ever exist when you start doing this. So I would flip that script around. The data won't exist for this. So how do you approach a project that will have the space to create that data, create that process, and then from that new standpoint, go from there? There's other things we can do with data cleansing. AI can help identify gaps and figure out where um, which it can predict what certain fields should be in empty systems. But this is kind of a separate topic on the data cleansing. But as it comes from the fact that you don't have the data to do this, well, that makes sense because we haven't been automating it.
That's very true. There's a lot of silo effects with the different departments and how all that data comes together. I mean, how does digitization potentially break down those silos to bring all that data into one useful pool of data or a process in this case?
Speaking of kind of making the data, so digitization one forces us to make the data to make these decisions. So it's all about getting that tribal knowledge out and onto data. Now, from here, we can take the data and actually use it to communicate with people. Now, communication isn't a scalable thing. It's one person. I message on Teams. If I'm communicating, I'm sitting in meetings all day. I'm not working. I'm not doing my job. This is an efficiency thing. But if my knowledge is imparted into the system and other people have access to it via dashboards or just being able to talk to it with some of the more modern chat to data tools in AI, well, now it's actually a scalable communications tool. Me as a planner might not have to message 100 people every single day to figure out what's going on the production floor. They could then just essentially look into what I'm actually doing via metrics and dashboards and these kinds of things. So, when it comes to breaking down the silos, some stuff I hear is like the great wall between sales and ops, like salespeople needing to know when they can make promises to their customers. Digitization really helps break down these silos because it democratizes the information within the organization from being in people's brains to being into systems. And I think this is a worthwhile pursuit. It really enables this common plan, do, check, act cycle based on facts. And often culturally, like I see a lot of continuous improvement mentality. This is really good in manufacturing. And the thing is, the continuous improvement often requires a lot of investigations to do. But if we bubble up that transparency, figure out and start digitizing these processes, we can really accelerate this process.
I really like how you use the term democratization of that data, and I think that's very important. We had a guest just earlier talk about exactly that. I mean, there's so much data in a typical manufacturing operation, yet a lot of it just isn't transparent to everyone. And when you have non-transparent data, it's not clear to each department or each team or individuals even of how best to use that data. The data is always there. Management understands that and sees that from my experience, yet they just don't know how to do it. We talk about ideas of putting things onto a Power BI dashboard or having better notifications or even summarizing that data into charts and graphs. But really, the idea of making that data super transparent and democratizing it to be accessible by everyone in the organization is really, really important. Niels, think about in terms of better, faster, cheaper. In our experience, when it comes to planning. How do we do frequent replanning to make things go faster?
It's impossible to make the perfect plan. I have a little saying where it's like the second I make a plan, it's already out of date. Like, for example, if I plan the perfect capacity plan yesterday down to the day, and then tomorrow a worker is sick and there's a no show, a different capacity mix than I was expecting, I need to expect to, if I'm running lean, I need to expect to be able to quickly adjust all the plan every single day based on today's reality. And so I think it's less about having a super accurate plan as being able to adjust the current plan much more frequently. And then that way we can stay closer to the reality at all points. So basically, if I can see what the change of today is causing in my plan, I can now decide how I'm going to react to that. I can react proactively with overtime if I know that a certain order is going to cause a certain resource center in my factory to be overloaded for a few weeks. And the likelihood that my workers will be able to do overtime sometime in the next couple of weeks is a lot more than if I ask them on the day the order is due. John might have a soccer game or something. So we can start switching around resources before there is an issue if we start seeing the impact of today further down the line. I think this is part of the answer of better. Moving back to kind of the dashboards and things, being able to access the information is also part of this better thing. Sometimes, like, Power BI is by far the norm, but we all know that there's this one genius in our companies that loves and knows how to use and filter the Power BI perfectly to answer these questions. But when you get into this massive dashboard and you have a simple answer like, oh, this, what's behind this metric? Like, why is our on time delivery 2% less? And then you have to go through a bunch of filters and menus to get the answer. That's where these kind of new age AI tools start coming in, where it's like, okay, I have the Power BI to give me the snapshot, and then I can talk to the AI to start giving me the details, the meat behind it, without having to ask my dashboard specialist on it. And so I think we all see Power BI as the gold standard, but it has some limitations to it. And I think this is also part of this better equation.
Yeah, I totally agree that, Power BI is a really good visualization tool, but it's not a great inquiry tool. And I think there needs to be a balance between visualization and the ability to inquire and drill down into the data. This is where a lot of companies, in my experience, tend to rely a little bit more on the Excel side than Power BI when it comes to their schedules, because with Excel, you can pretty much inquire as deep as you possibly want and spend enough time in the spreadsheets. But what is your perspective, Niels, when it comes to balancing the best features of Excel, Power BI, and Gemini or ChatGPT type of AI inquiry?
The advantages of Excel is that everybody knows how to use them. So then it comes to a point but where Excel is great, but it's hard to distribute Excel because there's a million Excel sheets, everybody has their own. So I think data and analysis is done in Excel are definitely irreplaceable in certain ways. But if you could upload them somewhere, and to a Power BI or to another system, then you can kind of have a way to like portal it out to the rest of the organization. Being able to talk to that Excel data with AI is also a good thing. I think uploading that into some sort of database where then the AI can query it and get you answers is a very interesting thing. In fact, some of my clients are looking to do this exact thing right now where they have a mix of data that goes into their dashboards, which some come from Excel analysis, some come from the ERP system, and then it gets displayed in Power BI. But it's exactly this ability to inquiry the dashboard, when you have, I think it's like 10 to 12 sheets of different data sources, being able to ask it those key questions is the end of the puzzle. And so that's something that I'm personally working on right now.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of fun. Let's go back to the planning aspect. We in manufacturing operations, when we look at planning, we often have to look at both short-term planning as well as long-term planning. What is your perspective on the importance or how best to handle the approach of short-term planning versus long-term planning for manufacturing companies?
I believe in agility and algorithms. Personally, when it comes to short and midterm, like I'm thinking the between even to the daily versus the next 2 months, I believe we can map out everything that needs to be done to the day with a proper algorithm, whether that's more of an optimized algorithm like a Gurobi or a prioritization like a greedy algorithm. Computers are capable of modeling what the production looks like over the next few months. The same algorithm can do the daily granularity and the 2 months at once. The difference in the job is how you're looking at it. So if the planner is looking at the next 2 months, then they're looking at, okay, when is capacity freeing up, when can the new orders come in, when do I need to order the certain materials? All of these things they're looking at in the next 2 months. When the planner is taking that same information and looking at the next day or so, they're thinking about what resources are in the factory, are my materials kitted, all of these kinds of things. But in my head, it can be the same plan that two people are looking at from different angles. When it comes more towards the long term planning and like macro things, I think that's a little bit outside of my expertise, but then we're starting to get more into like the forecasting side of things and trying to figure out demand. So there we're trying to look at, the things that can impact our products, whether it's from different global trends or seasonal demand and stuff like that. Yeah, that's different from the production planning, the short midterm.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of where my experience comes in, working with a lot of, especially in the EMS realm, where the aspect of bringing materials in at the right time is very important. And then once the materials are in-house, you want to produce that as quickly as possible to utilize your production resources. That's very important. So this idea of faster and cheaper, reducing costs in that case, is very much at the top of mind for a lot of the EMS side of manufacturing because it's all about converting your resources into money as quickly as possible in as short time as possible. So that layers into, again, going back to the engineering triangle of better, faster, cheaper, we've talked quite a bit about faster and cheaper in this point. What do you think, Niels, is the better dimension of effective optimized planning and scheduling? What is better in that case? Do we even look at that or should we?
The additional agility, being able to replan on a dime and see the downstream impacts of it, how it's going to do it, is part of this better key. I also think that the democratization of information, really high volume of communication, is part of this to enable us to grow. There's other things like, starting to get into more of the MES and tying that into how we check our quality and stuff like this. But really, I think the main bottleneck for people is being able to access the information and being able to plan and replan frequently, easily, do the level loading. This seems to be the part where we can most improve when it comes to planning and scheduling.
I've heard from some industry professionals talk about better from an aspect of, and those of us who's done machining, for example, would know if I have a particular part I need to put on a specific CNC so that it has the best output because based on the tolerance and capability of the machine, my planner should be, or scheduler should be scheduling that particular job on that specific machine because of the quality requirement. This is a dimension that a lot of production planners may or may not have the luxury of doing, because often, as far as my experience goes, a lot of ERP systems don't go to that level of granularity when it comes to planning for specific capabilities. Is this something that you think is possible, and how AI can help us, Niels?
Yeah, absolutely. And recently, I have a similar example where we did an analysis on workers and what they prefer to do. And so some people, they just like a certain type of material. Like they like working with titanium, or they like doing the new setups that nobody's done before, or there's different preferences within us humans, and sometimes better is also planning to who we have. Putting the right person on the right jobs is part of that. But to the kind of other part of your question, better scheduling leads to these more efficiency gains, because if we can put the right parts, the right machines, this is absolutely something we see. There's also the big batching problem. So when you start to figure out, okay, well, how many units do I run between setup times? Well, that's another place where we can get huge inefficiencies, and we have to optimize that against the inventory we're creating. I don't want to tie up too much of my resources in inventory, but I do want the efficiency gain. So this starts to scream optimization problem to me, where I'm, balancing two sides of this equation, the inventory versus the batching. Absolutely, better scheduling definitely looks at these cost metrics, looks at batching, it looks at the power of assigning people efficiently, and of course, I can't stress enough how much the communication is often a blocker at these manufacturing. Like if people walk into work and they know exactly what they're doing right away, that's a huge difference than having to coordinate, figure it out. Yeah, that's also part of that.
Well, thank you very much, Niels, for those great words of advice for our audience. Our episode's coming to an end. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective on great planning, scheduling, your perspective of AI and processes for manufacturing. For anyone who's got any questions, where will we be able to contact you, Niels, via your LinkedIn profile?
Yep, LinkedIn works. Also, our website, Bridge to AI. We're doing AI for manufacturing. It's focused in production scheduling. So anybody want to pop in and say hi in my DMs? Happy to have a conversation.
All right, Niels, I will drop that information into the podcast notes for anyone who wants to connect with Niels and his team. So thank you very much again for taking your time to join our episode. I hope you had some fun in this conversation. We certainly learned a lot from you. Thank you very much, Niels.
Thank you, Ken. Pleasure to be here.
All right. And for anyone, any comments or feedback, we always welcome that. So any questions, we love to hear from you. Until next time, thank you very much.